Bros, talking to you about the Progressive Era once again. This is part three, the final lecture of the lecture series of Chapter 18 from Foner. Do have a certain soon-to-be 6-year-old redhead down here with me this morning. So if you hear a big crash and a bang or anything like that, it's because my son is down here throwing a football around in the house, which he should not be doing. But anyway.
I know how to play football.
Okay, yes you do. All right, so starting things off with this, got to talk about these three foreign policies that still, as once again, this is a very relevant unit in terms of how it impacts your daily life and impacts decisions of the government that are still made to this day. But as you know, the three presidents are going to have three different ideas on how to deal with foreign nations. Largely up to this point in time, we had tried to remain somewhat isolated in foreign affairs or stay out of foreign affairs. The Monroe Doctrine is one thing that you will review just a little bit during this unit, in which we said anything that happened in the Western Hemisphere as far as European nations coming over and trying to start up colonies, we would oppose. That's going to play a large influence, and that, of course, came about in 1823. This is now 1900. But that played a large influence on what we are going to talk about today and how those presidents wind up coming up with their different policies. So, the first foreign policy that comes out of this era involves the Panama Canal, which is still utilized and deals with shipping to help ships reach the Atlantic Ocean from the Pacific Ocean and vice versa. And it goes down through the very small Isthmus of Panama. I believe it's about 90 miles across, and ships can go from one ocean to the next without having to go all the way around South America. Cuts down on shipping time, makes products that you get from other countries much cheaper as a result of saving on fuel and various other transport costs. But Roosevelt's foreign policies, he often tries to play peacemaker, even though Panama Canal, kind of controversial whenever it comes about. What happened was we organized a rebellion in Panama versus Colombia. Now, a little bit of background on this that I should have given you before. Panama had been basically an offshoot of Colombia in South America that Colombia claimed. And the French had been down there for years trying to build this private canal so that way they could have cheaper shipping costs from reaching one ocean to the next. Well, the French wind up failing in their efforts, and actually the main architect and engineer from France winds up having a mental breakdown throughout the whole thing. And many people die from something called the yellow fever, which is a type of mosquito-borne disease that causes internal hemorrhaging. Not a very pleasant thing, but anyway, what winds up happening after France withdraws, Theodore Roosevelt obtains a very large interest in Colombia and Panama in terms of getting this canal opened because he saw it as a major engineering feat like the Transcontinental Railroad that could help lower costs for the common person throughout the United States. So, what winds up happening? We organized a rebellion down there. Panama is going to break away from Colombia. The revolution took approximately 1 day to complete. I think one guy had a heart attack, and then a donkey also somehow died somehow. But those were the only two casualties of that revolution. It was a very bloodless thing, and Panama declared independence, and immediately after they declared their independence, or after they declared their independence as a nation, allowed the United States to come in and start building our canal. And we held the rights on that canal up until the last 20 to 30 years. So anyway, Latin America is outraged because we had opposed European nations doing this very similar thing. And then we had turned around and done the exact same thing that we said we did not want other people to doing. Okay, so that was one foreign policy of Theodore Roosevelt's. However, he largely relied upon the foreign policy of the Roosevelt corollary, okay, in which he said, with the other nations, we are going to negotiate first, and if the negotiations economically do not go the way we want them to go, then we may have to use our military. Okay, this became known as the speak softly and carry a big stick policy because Roosevelt said, we are going to speak softly to other nations, but we're going to have a big stick in hand if need be. And that's big stick's basically supposed to be like a club that you could use to threaten people if they did not want to do certain things that you wanted them to do. Okay, and basically this boils down to if Latin America had fell into disorder and revolutions broke out down there, such as Mexico, as you'll see here in just a second, we may have to use force to protect our economic interests and also keep peace within those places. Okay, and that's something we had also done over in Cuba with the Spanish-American War. So, mentioned Mexico a little bit. Mexico had a military government. We had been longtime enemies of Mexico going back to the 1820s and 1830s and 1840s, the era of the Alamo and things of that sort, and Santa Anna. But that military government they still have in Mexico at that point in time begins basically a brutal dictatorship. Okay, we waited to intervene, and we did not want to go in, even though that's falling into disorder. However, we realized quickly that this could pose a very large threat to the homeland of the United States, and then we do go into Mexico and intervene. Okay, I believe also there were some soldiers killed on U.S. soil at this point in time by Mexican military officials, and we said, okay, enough is enough, we're going in. And whenever we did it, it brought us very close to war with Mexico. And then whenever I say intervene, we did not send necessarily the military in at first. That was more of a thing later on. This was the speak softly part, where we were trying to influence people to join one side over another. Now, the big stick actually came in whenever we do send in military officials to help overthrow that government. And there were many armed conflicts that took place, mostly led by a guy named John J. Pershing, who is from northern Missouri, who actually is going to wind up leading all troops in World War I, the American Expeditionary Forces in World War I, so the Allied troops in World War I, going to be a very major player in the next unit we talk about here. But he forced Mexico to write a new constitution, oust their at that time current military leader, and once they do that, we withdrew and allowed Mexico to go on with business as usual again. Okay, moving on. The diplomacy of Taft is going to be referred to as the dollar diplomacy. Okay, the reason why it's referred to as the dollar diplomacy, hold on, buddy, you can watch TV here in just a second, okay? But we're going to refer to this as a dollar diplomacy because it involves U.S. dollars in order to help struggling countries in Latin America. Now, the reason why this comes about is because a lot of these countries began looking at Europe for potential help, or Europe saw them as a ripe target, I should say, to go in and have them, okay, Nolan, stop it, go in and have these countries utilize their resources and take from them. So what's going to wind up happening with that is the U.S. is going to say, hey, we can give you cash, and that will help you out of financial difficulties that you are having, and you don't need to mess with Europe at that point in time. Okay, and I will go through a few scenarios of how this works still to this day here in just a few minutes, but dollar diplomacy, yeah, we still do that. Okay, we give cash to struggling nations to help the threat of communism not be so appealing. Okay, we do that primarily with Italy and Greece in the 1950s. But anyway, we'll move on from there here in just a second. The last one is going to be Wilson's missionary diplomacy, or the moral diplomacy. But basically, Wilson felt that we had a moral responsibility. There you can all see my screen time, how much I'm addicted to my phone. But we have a moral responsibility to protect Latin America from oppressive, undemocratic governments. And this moral responsibility was to spread democracy, not necessarily to spread Christianity, but we felt a lot better about ourselves if we went in and helped them with these oppressive, undemocratic governments and tried to promote democracy over them. Okay, now, mentioned a little bit before about how each of these basically could still influence to this day in terms of countries you probably have heard of. Now, all these dealt with Latin America, and all these dealt with countries that we wanted to help. We now can use some of these elements on our enemies. Okay, so specifically, the Roosevelt corollary, the speak softly and carry a big stick. President Trump utilized this with North Korea. Okay, in terms of North Korea, as you may remember, we utilized the aspect of we're going to talk to the North Koreans. We don't like their nuclear weapons program, and so we are going to speak with them. But we also made comments like we are going to rain fire and fury upon them, which the world has never seen. A lot of name-calling and threat of the U.S. military and U.S. force But that's something that President Trump tried to do whenever he sat down with Kim Jong-un and attempted to negotiate with him his end of the nuclear weapons program that North Korea has. Okay, elements of the dollar diplomacy, kind of a unique way of looking at this, but as you know, and as I mentioned, we try to give money to people to help them. At this point in time, you can also use dollar diplomacy to give money to people to keep them from doing things. Now, the deal with dollar diplomacy, you could see elements of this in terms of giving people money so they would stop doing things with the Iranian nuclear deal or the Iranian nuclear deal, however you want to put the accent on that. But with the Iran, what winds up happening in Obama's administration is President Obama, along with some other European leaders, went to the Iranians and said, hey, what do we need to do to get you all to stop testing nuclear materials and get you all to stop your weapons program? And they made some various concessions to them, including cash, so that way they would stop. And of course, President Trump withdrew from that deal, but as you can see, there were conflicting views on how to deal with foreign countries at that point in time in 1912. It still rings true here in 2022 as I deliver this lecture. Okay, the missionary diplomacy, our moral responsibility to protect, it says Latin America there from oppressive, undemocratic governments. This is used as justification back in 2003 whenever we decided to invade Iraq. Okay, part of that invasion dealt with, we felt that they had weapons of mass destruction and that government was oppressive there and they were a very large threat to U.S. security. So even back within maybe some of your all's lifetime, a little bit beforehand, but a war that has definitely impacted your all's life, and the fact that it's taken place during your lifetime. Maybe some family members fought in that war, but we felt that we had this moral responsibility to go in and save the people of Iraq from their oppressive government and free them. Okay, and we do the same thing with Operation Enduring Freedom, in which we went into Afghanistan and attacked their government as a result of harboring Osama bin Laden and refusing to turn him over after 9/11. And we said we will go in, we will overthrow this government, make the world safer for democracy, and put in a democratic government there. Okay, and you can all see the repercussions of that as we withdraw from Afghanistan withdrew from Afghanistan here within the last year. So anyway, these three foreign policies, while they were historical events that we can now analyze, you can still see elements of them in the decisions that presidents make to this day. So again, this unit, like I said before, while it took place over 120, almost 130 years ago now, the influences that these presidents have on society are so great that they still affect decision making for our presidents to this day, and still have various things that impact your life and make your life a little more free and democratic compared to people that were around, like I said at the beginning of the 1900s. So anyway, that concludes Chapter 18. Next week we will be getting into World War I. So you have that to look forward to, our first major war of this semester. So have a good rest of the week, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me with any questions or comments or concerns.